Alright, so we're going to start looking at a little bit of trigonometry and begin looking at trig. Trigonometry begins with a right triangle. Trigonometry is always going to have a right triangle to it. And there's always going to be some sort of angle that you're dealing with. So let's say, I'm going to say this is 34 degrees. Okay, so it's going to be one of those corner angles. And whichever angle it is that you're dealing with, the first thing you want to do is go through and start labeling your sides. And there's three sides that we're going to look at. We're going to look at opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. Okay, now I will usually just put an O, an H, and an A. But in trig, you always want to figure out which angle you're dealing with. So we're dealing with this angle right here. So the first angle, or the first side that I have students usually label, is is the opposite side. So wherever your angle happens to be, the side completely opposite of it is called the opposite. The hypotenuse, just like it is in Pythagorean theorem, the hypotenuse is the side directly across from the right angle. So there's my hypotenuse, which means this one is my adjacent. Adjacent means next to. Now, you're probably asking, why is it important that I label my sides O, A, and H? Well, when you start dealing with trig, you're going to have to be able to figure out which side is which, and that actually tells you which trig function you're going to look at. So, there's three trig functions you have to be able to use in Math 2. One of them is sine. So, the sine of whatever angle it is that you're dealing with is going to equal your opposite over your hypotenuse. Okay, so if you're dealing with a triangle where you know something about an opposite and a hypotenuse, you would use sine. Second one is called cosine, and again it'd be cosine of your angle, which will make a little more sense why I have those parentheses when we actually start looking at problem. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And our third one is going to be tangent. And tangent is your opposite over adjacent. So make sure we go ahead and write those down, because we're going to have to make sure that we know those as we start solving for them. Now, in order to memorize these, because they're not going to give you any sort of a formula, let's say, on your exam. So, I've created a saying. It says, some old hippie and there's our sign right there. S-O-H. So some old hippie caught another hippie. So there's your C, A, and H. Tripping. On asphalt. Okay. So that's one way you can try to help yourself remember your saying to it. Some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on asphalt, which will kind of help you to remember those orders. Another one that I've heard people using is they'll say sa, ka, toa to kind of do the S over, S equals O over H, so sa. Well, actually, usually, let me erase that real quick. Usually when people use that one, they just write it out. So they'll say sa, ka, toa. And that helps them to remember that too. So it does not matter to me however it is that you remember that. Either using Sakatoa or some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on asphalt. Either way, we're going to have to know how to do those. Alright, so if you need anything from the screen, go ahead and get it, because I'm going to clear it off. Alright. The other important thing that we have to know when we're doing trig is dealing with your calculator. your calculator, anytime that your calculator gets reset, it's automatically going to go into radians. And I know you have absolutely no idea what a radians is, but you're going to see what that is in Math 3. In Math 2, we only deal with degrees. So what we have to do is on our calculator, we're going to have to hit mode. Okay, and when you hit the mode button, it's right next to the green button, or the blue button, I'm sorry. Right next to your blue button. And the second or third one down, it's going to say either degree or radian. If your calculator is automatically in radians, so you have to designate it to be in degree. So you'll highlight degree and just hit enter. And you don't have to do this for every single trig problem. Just whenever you start one, just check and make sure your calculator is in degree mode. And your calculator will stay in degree mode unless you just completely clear out your memory. And it does not affect any other function in your calculator. Sorry. Alright, so we're going to go through and do our first trig function. Alright, so if you need anything from the screen, go ahead and get it. Okay, so we're going to start our first trig function. And we're going to say this is 17 degrees. We're going to say let's say this is 15, and there's my x. Okay, so again, what we first want to do is we're going to go through and label our sides. So the angle we're dealing with is right here, the 17 degrees. So the first side I'm going to label is my opposite, which is completely on the opposite side of that triangle. Next one I want to label is my hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always right across from the right angle, so this 15 side is my hypotenuse. That leaves this one as my adjacent. Now in trig, there's only going to be two sides that you know something about. You may not necessarily know the side, but it has some sort of mark with it. And in this one, I know something about the hypotenuse, and I know something about the adjacent. So, remembering what our trig functions are, our sine, cosine, and our tangent. Well, the one that deals with, in this case, an A and an H is our cosine. So that means it's going to be the cosine of 17. And cosine is always adjacent over hypotenuse, so that would be x over 15. Alright, so this problem, one more step to be able to go through and solve. Again, make sure your calculator is in degree mode because we're dealing with degrees. And we'll want to go through and solve for our x value. So to solve for my x value, I have to get x by itself. So to get x by itself, I'm going to have to get rid of the division by 15. So to get rid of the division by 15, I have to multiply both sides by 15. Well, in this case, the 15s are going to cancel, so my x is equal to 15 times the cosine of 17. And all I have to do is type that in my calculator. Make sure you're in degree mode, and you hit 15 times. The sine, cosine, and tangent button are right above the 7, 8, 9, two buttons above the 7, 8, 9. So we hit cosine, and it'll automatically pop up the parentheses. We put in 17, we hit enter, and I get 14.34. Okay. So that means the length of that side is 14.34. So the math of trig is not necessarily hard. It's just making sure you have to label your sides correctly initially. Alright, so with this one, if you need anything from the screen, go ahead and get it. I'm going to create another problem. Alright, so let's try this one. Let's say this is 32 degrees. Again, I'm just making these up. So let's say this is 12, and this is 3, let's say. Alright, well again with trig, the first thing we want to do is go through and label our sides. The angle I'm dealing with is over here, the 32 degrees. So the opposite side is over here. My hypotenuse is across from the right angle, and this is my adjacent. Well on this one, the only two sides I know something about is my adjacent and my opposite. So remember our symbols. Okay, so in this one, the only the function that deals with with an opposite and adjacent is your tangent. So this is going to be the tangent of 32, and tangent is my opposite, which is going to be 3 over my adjacent. Oops, I didn't really, hold on. I didn't mean to completely forget to put an X somewhere. Sorry about that. Just realized I did that. So in this case, my opposite is X. Sorry, which is over my adjacent, which is 12. Well, again, to get X by itself, I just have to multiply both sides by 12. So I get X equals 12 times the tangent of 32. So if I type that in my calculator, 12 times the tangent of 32, I get 7.498, which really is pretty darn close to 7.5. So the ones we looked at, sorry, I still have a cold. The ones we looked at so far had an X in the numerator, so now let's look at some that have an X in the denominator. So I'm going to clear the screen, pause it if you need anything. Okay, so let's try this one. Let's do, I don't know, 21 degrees. Well, doesn't even look like a 21, hold on. 21, there we go. It's 21 degrees, let's do, that. Alright, so again, the first thing we want to do is label our sides. So there's my opposite, my hypotenuse, and my adjacent. So this time the only two sides I know something about is an opposite and a hypotenuse, which is my sine function. Sine is always opposite over hypotenuse. Okay, so with this one, because the X is in the denominator, it's actually a little bit harder to go through and solve. So the easiest way to think about this is as a proportion. That sine of 21 is the same thing as sine of 21 over 1. And what we'll do is we'll set it up as a proportion to it. So if we take our X and put it over the 1, so X over 1, which is really just X. Okay. So X over 1, and we're going to do 7 over this. The same thing as 7 over sine of 21. So, really, all we have to do in our calculator is 7 divided by the sine of 21 to get our X value. So, 7 divided by sine of 21, which is 19.5. Okay. Alright, so we'll do one more where our X is in the denominator, and I think you'll be set to try to go through and do some of those problems. Okay, so let's say, I don't know, 3 degrees, and we'll do, that. Okay, again, the first thing we want to do is label our sides. There's my opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. So I know something about an opposite and an adjacent, so that means I'm dealing with tangent. So the tangent of 3 degrees. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so it'd be 4 over x. So again, to be able to find my x value, to be able to find my x value, x is equal to 4 over the tangent of 3. So 4 divided by the tangent of 3 is 76.32. Alright, so hopefully that helps you be able to solve your trig functions.